It's that time of year when I think about my grandmother, my mom and my dad, my aunts. We used to always get together and make tamales. My dad, my grandma, grandpa. So anyway, it's a very good time of the year to make some tamales. So chile anchos, they don't bring a lot of heat, but they bring good flavor. So if you want some meat tamales that are not very hot, you can use some chile anchos. And then we have the chile cascabel. And this one has a little bit of heat. So if you just want to add one or two, and you don't want that much heat, that should do okay. I'm adding a few. I'm adding a variety of chiles. And then this is the other chile de árbol. And you can get them in packs, or you can sometimes find these things where you can weigh them out from a bin. So I have some of both. So those are the main chilies that I'm going to use. Because I like hot, spicy, the kind of hot tamales that have a good hot chili flavor, I like to mix in some jalapeno peppers. And then to really bring the heat, you gotta use some green serrano peppers. These are thinner. They're also green, but they're thinner, and they have a pretty, they'll make your salsa or your chili mix, whatever you're doing, make it really hot. So I will add about two or three of these to make a big batch of the chili sauce. And of course these will be rinsed, and I'll have them cut open and the seeds will be taken out of them. You don't want to have the seeds when you have your chili mixture for the meat. The reason I'm making a chili mixture is that it's going to be put on into cooked pork shoulder meat. And so these are dry and these are fresh. So I'm going to wash them and cut them in half and take out the seeds. A lot of people like to wear gloves. I like the little vinyl gloves that fit well for this. And I have to throw out a lot of the seeds and stems and things and make sure everything's cleaned up. So I'll be heating this up with some of the broth from the meat. So I'm just showing you ahead of time which peppers I have. So some pork shoulder chuck roast is good. I'm going to be cooking whatever fits in my 3.5 quart or 5 quart pan with hot water. I'm going to put onion, and I'm going to put salt, and I'm going to put garlic first into the hot water where I'm going to be boiling my meat. I'm going to cook my meat. Later, some of the spices that I will put in the meat will also include very little comino. This ground comino goes a long way. You don't want to put a full tablespoon or anything like that. That'll overpower your tamales and make them, this stuff is just too powerful in flavor. So I will use about half of a teaspoon. Then I like to use a little bit of the oregano, and then when I'm cooking my meat is what I'm going to put these spices in. I'm going to use some salt, and also I'll put a bay leaf. So I have onion, garlic, oregano, a little comino that's going to go into the meat, salt. Then I'll be later when I have my chilies, and I'll put the chilies in the blender. When I go back to my chilies, I'm going to put those in the blender and put in some of the cooled stock. And you can add chicken stock or beef stock or both into the chili mix. I have my chili mix ready in the blender with some garlic and onion. Then I will add stock in the blender after it's cooled. And then I will blend everything to make the chili sauce. And I'll use a strainer to pour into the meat so I don't have a bunch of seeds and pieces of stem or anything else that got by me. I also have some corn husk, and what I'm going to be doing somewhere in this process is washing them and putting them in a plastic bowl and separating out my very large corn husk from the small pieces, or if there's any that look really crummy looking or molded or anything, then I'll take those out. And I'll save some of the smaller pieces, separate them out and save them so I can put them at the bottom of the tamale cooking pot that I have. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is cooking my pork shoulder with spices into a pan. And I'm going to cook it so that I can shred the meat. And again, I'm adding garlic, onion, some salt, and a bay leaf in there. I might put in a little oregano also, just to flavor the meat as it's cooking. Okay, so I'm going to be adding onion and garlic, and I'm going to add the meat in with the bay leaf and a little bit of oregano. I'll put the comino later into probably the chili sauce. So I've added some onion, and I'm adding a little bit more garlic, just about 3 or 4 cloves for the big packet of meat. And the meat, I did trim off as much fat, that was globs of fat, as I could. So I put it in to cook with onion and with garlic and salt. So for the salt, I used a couple of these tablespoons for that meat, because I'm going to add a little bit more into my chili sauce. This meat has enough fat, and I'm going to be adding some to the masa. I'm going to add some of the Crisco fat. So I don't like my tamales to be too oily with fat. That's just kind of gross to me. So I'm going to be working on the leaves now. So I have a big plastic bowl that I wash out with hot water and soap. And I'm going to be bringing my leaves out of the package. These are corn husk. And I'm going to be rinsing them off and taking off all those little strings from the corn. Anything that, any kind of trash in there, crumbs or spotted stuff that I can, separate them out. So I'm going to be washing out all my corn husk and trying to get those weird smells or off the little strings off of them. So I'm going to be separating them out and washing them. And then I'm going to let them soak in a bowl with cold water. And part of the reason is that some of these have little crumbs or strings in them, and I don't like that. And I use a little bit warm water, then I'll put cold water when I have them sitting in there soaking for a long period of time, just to give them an extra wash. And sometimes you'll find some that look really gross, like some of these that might have like a little mold in them. So I'll take those out. I have a strong olfactory smell, so I can smell the corn husk. I like to get some of that smell off of there too. And every so often we'll find some that look really bad. And if they look really bad, I'll tear them up. Like this one. This one looks pretty bad. So I'll take that one out and tear it up. So the masa they have at the H-E-B near me is this type of masa. Usually I like to get something that's less yellow because I'm going to save some of that chili sauce, the one I'm going to make in the blender. I'm going to save some of that liquid and some of the broth to add into my masa. I'm going to add a type of lard that I like to use Crisco shortening. Some people use pork shortening or other kinds of lard, and that will be mixed in hopefully in my mixer. If your corn husk are not rinsed, you'll have a lot of these stringy hair, kind of like from the corn. You don't want to have that in your tamales. People will think you left hair in there. So you want to have them washed and cleaned up. And you're going to separate out any ones that are too burnt or toasty or they have mold or anything like that. You want to clean them out of there. So that's one of the reasons I always have my hair up. Whenever I'm cooking, I always put my hair up. So here I am working. I'm checking on the meat and again getting any of this excess fat that floated to the top. And I'm just taking that out, pouring that out. I want my stock to have less of this debris that floats to the top, this yucky fat stuff. And again, you can do this in steps. Right now I'm working alone. In a couple of days, one of my cousins will come over and we'll work together. But this is something you can do by yourself. It's just always, it's usually more fun, and it seems to go quicker if you can split the work with someone else. But it can be done by yourself if you want. Okay, so this is going to be cooking and boiling, and yes, depending on how you want your meat, you can put a cover on this and try to steam it so it's softer. But this will be fine. I've worked enough with this to know that this will be just fine. Okay, so now I'm going to be working on. So I've set some of the stock aside so it can cool down so I can mix it with the chilies. And what I'm doing now is I'm kind of cleaning up the meat with the excess onion and pieces that I have, because I'm going to add fresh onion to the chili mix. So I'm just scooping out anything that's kind of yucky, throwing it away. So I'm going to just take out some of the stock so I can use it with the chiles. And I'm going to strain. After I blend my chiles, I'm going to strain them with the stock. So there's several ways to cook the chiles. You can cook the chiles, the chile ancho, and with the chile de árbol and chile cascabel. And one of the ways to do it is to put it in on top of the meat and then take them out while they're still hot and put them into your blender. So that's one of the things I do. I take a little shortcut there, saves me a little time. If I want to put them in a separate pot by themselves, I can do so. If I want to cut the chiles open, I know to put gloves on because my hands will get pretty hot. So I've gotten rid of pretty much the majority of the onion and big pieces that were there. I've taken out the fat. So this is a lot of my broth. I still have a little bit of the broth in there. So I'm going to be shredding this meat with 2 forks, and then I'm going to be cooking this as I will add the chilies. So I'm pulsing my chiles with some of the stock. I'm going to add a little bit more stock, and remember, don't breathe this stuff. Whatever, don't have your head up here and breathe this, because you won't like the flavor in your nose or your eyes. It'll sting. Okay, so we pulsed it some. It's going to pulse a little bit more. Then I'm going to blend. All right, so now this is the mixture, the concoction of chiles to flavor the meat, because the meat is not flavored at this time. So I'm going to be straining this onto the meat. So remember that I'm shredding the meat before I add the chiles, the chili sauce. And I'm taking out any globs of fat, any of the gristle or anything like that, because I like my meat to be lean. And I know that when I've gone to other people's houses and eaten tamales, I don't like to find globs of fat in my tamales. So anything that looks like it's just all fat, then I throw that away. And I have the stock removed from the meat, but right now I'm just shredding the meat using the 2 forks and ripping it apart, and then I'll be putting the chili sauce that's in the blender and straining that through a strainer. Just want to remind you that you can also add some of the Eckhart chili powder. The Eckhart chili powder is not hot, it just adds flavor. So that's definitely something I want to do, is add, that would be 2 spoonfuls. So now I have my strainer. I have different size strainers, so I'm using this one. I'm going to be adding that stock and chili. So I pour some of this in there, and notice it gets hot. So then I'm going to start to add some of the stock in there to wash out as much of the flavor, except for the seeds and the stems or anything else that got by me. Okay. So So we're getting the good flavors there. And notice the meat is getting the color. That's where the meat from the tamales gets its color. And I do have this on low. I never stopped cooking it. I just had to strain it. So what I'll do is I'll take out some of this liquid and mix it up in there, strain it, and you can even push out through the hose like my mom would do the sauce. So this has salt, it has garlic, it has chiles. You know, we have onion in here. Now I did throw out the big pieces that I initially cooked the meat with. I threw out all of the big onion and the bay leaf, any big chunks of gristle or fat. So I cleaned up the meat before I add the chili. That's important. So now the meat is still cooking, but it's going to be cooking in the chili flavor. So then I will get to add more. And some of this will boil away, so I'm okay with doing that. Now, of course, I'm using the pork shoulder, and it's shredded. But if I make chicken tamales, I can do the same process. I will have just deboned chicken meat in here, and I can use the red chili sauce. I think what I'm going to do when I make my chicken ones, I'm going to make a green sauce that will be different. So for today, I'm just focusing on the pork, but tamales, the traditional tamales. And again, this will be cooking for a while, and I'll be shredding the meat as the meat is cooking in there until some of that stock cooks down. So I want to keep a little bit of the chili. And if I want to add in the masa, I have some more stock. I could also use chicken stock mixed with this when I make the masa. So basically, in a minute, I'll be working with the masa harina, and I want to add flavor and a little bit of color to that too. So again, if you don't want the heat, just don't add the green peppers that I added, the serrano and the jalapeno, or the smaller red peppers. So this is going to have the flavor of oregano, garlic, onion, the chili powder, the chiles that's in there, and it's going to just be cooking down for some time while I shred this finer. And when it cooks down, the meat can continue to cook as long as I have enough chili sauce in there and stock. It can cook for a long time and get really soft. So I got to the point where I'm not adding stock anymore. I'm just adding the chili mix in here and swirling it in with the meat, letting all the flavors go through. I'll do that for a couple of minutes, and then I'll take this and throw this out. And yes, you can make it finer. Everybody's different. I like to see the chunks in there. Some people want it really sauced up. They want to get as much as possible through the colander. And then, so I'm going to be cooking this down. And the meat will get really, really soft as we cook this down. So this meat's been cooking for another 45 minutes after I took it out from the big boil. So I still have some of the broth on the side for the masa. And I'm going to be shredding the meat even more. Meanwhile, I'm working on the masa next. So when I'm going to be working with the masa, I'm going to put some of this masa in, and I'm going to be adding Crisco and a little salt. I'm going to be working it in there. Could add a little of the non-hot chili powder, and I have some chicken bouillon with a little bit of the chili water that I had in the blender. So that's what's going to be mixed in the bowl. Of course, when I was a kid, all the ladies would get together and we have this much larger bowl, and we would all be working it with our hands. But just like, it's easier to do if you can take a shortcut, save some time. So the idea is that I'm taking some of the shortening, or you can use lard if you like, if you're not doing it by hand. The idea is that you want to aerate some of the masa dough and incorporate that shortening in there so that it gets pretty fluffy and airy. So I'm going to be I'm going to maneuver this so that I can switch it around and I can get as much of the shortening to dissolve, well, not dissolve, but to get incorporated into the masa. And I want the masa really light and airy with a lot of air pockets, a lot of little air pockets in it. And again, I want some flavor in the masa where it has a little salt and a little of the chili powder if you don't want it hot. But if you want it hot, then you want to use a little bit of the chili mix that you had in the blender. Whether or not you use the chili mix that you had in the blender, you do want to use some chicken stock to flavor the masa. So the masa has a really good flavor with the chicken stock. So I'm going to be working this for a while. So I'm working to get this off the sides, and I have put in additional shortening. And I want to make this be as fluffy as I can get it. Probably take me about 25 minutes to do this batch. It would take me longer if I did it by hand. That's true. So I want to get it really airy. I have some salt, and I have a little bit of the pink chili with chicken stock in there. So I say it's really good if you have an extra pair of helping hands. So after we get done with the masa, then we're going to be using a spoon to spread it on the corn husk. We'll spread a layer on it, and then we'll put some meat in the center and fold over the ends. That's where we kids, when we were young, we used to go and help to spread the masa and then add meat, get those ready. But this is something I'm just wanting to work on my own and get the recipe down. But remember, don't add very much salt to the masa because the meat has the most salt. And then the tamales will be steamed in a large pot. And your tamales can get bland. If you steam them, some of the flavor will come out from the meat into the masa. So just remember that. So it's getting softer now and kind of airy. And I keep pulling it off the sides and putting it back into the middle with my spatula. Starting to get a little fluffier, a little more airy. Okay, so I've got my masa. It's pretty pliable, and I've got a few of these. I'm going to do a trial run and see if I like the flavors and everything. So these corn husks, they seem to have a side that's kind of smooth, and that's where I put my masa, my dough on. And I don't put it all the way up to the top because I want to put it about so far, and I'm going to put it on most of it. Then I'm going to fold one side, I'm going to put the meat in the middle, and then I'm going to enclose one side and then the other, and then I'm going to fold the tail, the end of it, back so that it's going to kind of lock in a little bit. And then I'll be standing them around. I have a temporary steamer. This is not the big pot I use. I'm just going to run a trial on these. And so tomorrow I'll be making some other ones besides the batch that I'm working on today. But anyway, the idea is that you want to take a spoon the way we kids always did it. They got the kids to do this. So we took some on the back of a spoon, and then we have our shell husk, and we start to kind of like spread it out like if it's a butter. And that's why you want this dough to be pliable, almost like if it's a frosting. So it's kind of light and it won't be, it'll have some pockets of air. It'll be light and fluffy to eat. It won't be too, I don't know, dry, because the Crisco oil, the Crisco shortening adds an amount of fat to it. And then you also will have the steam that will allow the meat to be cooked even more in the center of the tamales. Now this meat is fully cooked. So we take some, and a lot of times we're going to be doing this with our hands now. Of course, you got to have clean hands, so make sure your kids wash their hands before they start helping you with this. And you want to get some of the shredded meat, and you want to put that in the center. So again, if you find any gristle or anything that you don't want to be eating, now's the time, you know, you can catch it and throw it aside. But you put some of the meat in the center. And I don't like to be skimpy with my tamales, and at the same time I don't like them to be too full. The tamales that I make are usually like a medium size. So one side gets closed, and then the other side gets closed over that. And then when you close both sides, you want to have the tail go towards the back, so it kind of locks it. And some people like to pinch the top close, and then they stand them up. Now, this is a steamer. But what we do with the big pots, we usually use very large pots, and we'll put a coffee cup upside down in the center. That's what I'll be doing next. I'm just running a test to see if I like the flavor on these tamales. So that's going to be a continuous process. Just going to be doing this. Again, my dough is pretty soft and pliable. It's not hard. It's no longer cold with all the blending that I was doing. And that's why I left my masa out for a while, so that it could not be so cold and hard to handle. But the blender did its, the mixer did its job. If I had to do this by hand, oh my goodness, yeah, it would have taken me a lot longer. And some people might take a shortcut. Somebody might buy the meat already cooked. Somebody might buy tamales already made, but I wanted to make my own. And so I just put some in the middle and close one side, and then fold the other side, and then put the tail towards the back. And again, some people pinch the top, and then I'm putting it in this little steamer. This is my vegetable steamer, but I'm just running a few. So this will be my taste test. So this can still be doctored. After I make a small batch of like 3 or 4, then if I want to add more salt, I could add more salt. The stock is at the bottom, so I might stir this meat up so some of the chili stock will come up on top. I did the cold water test, and I just will have to make another batch after I use up all this masa. So I don't want to mix anything else up until all of this is used up. So for now, I'm just going to do 3 tamales, cook them, and see if I like them while I go find my tall tamale cooking pot. It's in a box somewhere. I might have to wash it out. Okay, so I'll be back. All right, I'm going to do the 3rd one. So I'm just using the back of a spoon to lay out that dough. And I just brush it up, kind of like a frosting. It's pretty light, easy to handle. So, and remember, I'm not going to lay this masa all the way down to the tail. No, that's silly. That will work against you. And you don't want masa coming out in the water when you're steaming. You want the steam to work to cook the dough, so you'll have a soft dough. So I'm putting meat in the center. And again, if I find any yucky fat, I'll get rid of it. Or it depends what, if you used a thigh bone or something else instead of the pork shoulder, roast or whatever, then, you know, you want to make sure you don't have any kind of bone, flicks of bone in there or anything. Okay, so I fold one side. Then I can go ahead and close this up. And where I have my open seam, remember that that's where I fold my the tail for the tamale there. I'm going to fold it on the other side. So I don't want to make these super thick or super giant, because then they'll take longer to cook. And I want all my tamales to be cooked at the same time. So whenever they come out, I don't want to have to worry that some are cooked and some are not cooked. So that's the reason why I make them all about the same size. Of course, if you have little kids, you know, they want to make small ones or giant ones, and then you may have to put them in 2 different pots. This is a good idea for the kids to help you with this part. I don't recommend the kids help you with the other chilies or things like that, but at this place, you know, lots of spoons, extra hands to just put this on the smoother side of the corn husk, so that when you open your tamale later, where there's less ridges, it's a little bit smoother. You can open up the tamale, it'll just roll out. So I'm just running a little test by just doing like 3 tamales in my little steamer, just to check the flavor. Now this is my tamale pot, and so I'll be putting water at the bottom, and then I'll also be putting some shredded corn husk leaves. And the idea was, if we ran out of water, then the corn husk would start to smell. You could smell that they were starting to get toasty and then burn. So I'm going to go ahead and put the little steamer bottom. Some people choose not to do it with it. Some people do it with it. And of course, we always use the coffee cup. So when we put a coffee cup in the center, that's where we would start to stand up the tamales in a circle around the coffee cup. So we would have water underneath the steamer. We have some leaves underneath also. And then we have the coffee cup in the center. And then we would have our raw tamales. The dough is raw. I know the meat's cooked, but the uncooked tamales that would be standing up in a circle, going round and round. And you just keep going. And then once you have the first layer, then you start putting them on top, round and round. And the center, towards the center, you put the opening. And then we used to put, I know my grandma on them, the little towels, the little kitchen towels, they would put 1 or 2 that were moist. You know, they would get moist on top, and then we close the top, the lid. Where's my lid? Okay, so here we go. I got the lid over here. So after we had the tamales filled up to the top, and we had 1 or 2 kitchen cloths covering the tamales, and then we would put the lid in there. That's how my grandma and my mom and my tias and cousins and everybody else did them. So that's when I make the bigger batch. That's for the family size batch. And of course, depending on how big the families were, we could see 2 of these going. Yeah, but this is pretty good. I got this one from H-E-B some years ago. Been using it ever since. I like it. So I am a person who cooks things. So the masa has just a half a teaspoon of the baking soda. I did put some salt. I am using Crisco, but not as much if I'm using the chicken stock, because the chicken stock has some of the grease that the chicken released. One of the things we do put to flavor is you can add some of the chicken bouillon powder into your masa, especially if you're not using a lot of pepper, chilies, or anything else. You can always add that bouillon into the masa. Some people add white cheese like queso fresco, or sour cream, a couple of tablespoons of sour cream to get different flavors. Just want to taste this masa before you put it on the corn husk. You want to make sure it's salty enough and that it has good flavor. this batter is getting fluffy. It's warmed up. You can see the level came up some with all the aerating. It has some of the Crisco in there. So on this side, I have a little piece of lard from Crisco, and on the other side, I have some of the masa, and it's staying on top. So when you drop in a little piece of masa and it floats, you know your masa is good. So this has been going for quite a while. I had this on for like a good 35-40 minutes. I had to turn off the mixer to let it rest, and then I came back to it and turned it back on. So I'm adding the chili to the chili concoction that we made to the pork. And so I'm shredding the pork, and I'm going to let it cook in some of the stock. In order to get the chili down, I poured in some stock. And the idea is just to catch the seeds or any stems or anything that may have gotten away. This is after I blended it in the blender. So I want to flavor the meat. So this has salt, a little bit of comino. It has chile ancho. Those are the milder peppers. They look like giant prunes. Then I've got chile de árbol, the small ones that are hot, red. And I have chile cascabel, which is a medium red pepper. I did go ahead and put a couple of jalapenos, and I also added serrano pepper. And remember that this is the flavoring for about 3 pounds of this pork shoulder roast. Whatever meat you use, you can do this with chicken or your choice of meats. Some people, instead of using the red chile anchos, they might decide to use hatch peppers, especially when they make the green ones. They'll blend up the hatch peppers and other kinds of peppers that they want. That's another good flavor, a different tasting flavor for tamales. So this has garlic, salt, little comino. Turn my fire back on. I turned it off temporarily, but I'm putting this back on medium high. Like level 6. And so this is going to boil down into the meat. So I did remove some of the stock so that I could pour it on top of through the strainer. This is just one of the regular strainers that I use, for straining things. Remember that some of the spices that went into the meat were the chili powder, Eckhart's chili powder. There were some of this chile de árbol, the smaller ones. These bring on the heat. So I used other chiles, like chile ancho, in the mixture that was in the blender. I used chile de árbol. So you got chile ancho. Okay, they're mixed up in here. So the idea is to pick up the... So I saved this overnight in the refrigerator, of course, and also the masa. So I beat it a little bit more, whipped up more air into it today. I added some salt and a little bit more flavoring from the chili powder. So I have my pot on the stove ready, and it's already on, and I've it has a steamer bottom with hose at the bottom, and I already have quite a bit of water, and I have some of the tamale husk ripped into bits, probably about 8 of the husk. And so I have this closed so that it can get hot, and I do have 1 coffee cup in there put upside down. So I'm going to be working on getting as many of these tamales prepared so that I can put them into the steamer. As I finish my tamales, I'll put them into some kind of bowl. Right now the easiest thing I could grab is my a little vegetable steamer that I have. So I use the back of a spoon. That's what we kids were given, spoons, and all the kids would help put the masa onto the corn husk. And then we would have meat that goes in the center, the cooked meat. This is, mine is pork right now. Later I'll be making some chicken ones. And then we'd fold one end over and then the other end over. And yes, life is not perfect, so that's okay. Let's see, gonna fold the other end over and kind of close it up. And then we fold the tail on the opposite end, so it kind of locks it in a little bit. And then we like to kind of push the top together so that the meat juices will stay inside the tamale. And what I'm doing is I'm going to be arranging them. So the tail side leans. I'm going to arrange them in this small bowl before I put them to steam. That way I can put a lot of them together. Right now I'm working by myself. In a couple of days I'll have cousins coming over or somebody else to help. But I wanted to get a jump start. So this is refrigerated meat. It is cold. The dough, the masa, is raw. So it will be cooked. The dough will be cooked because of the steam that's in the big giant steamer, my tamale pot. So I'm trying to show you how I do this, and then close the top. And again, the side that has the tail is what I'm putting down right now, so they keep their shape. So these corn husks were cleaned and washed out before I put them in the bowl where I'm working with them. They're still a little wet. Sometimes I have to use a little kitchen towel to pat dry to get some of the water off, but that's okay. Anyway, once I put them into the large pot, I'll have a big pot of the tamales cooking. It's already got hot water. Before I put them in, I'm going to add more water because I know some of this water is already steaming away. And then I'll be cooking them, could be about 45 minutes, an hour. I'll take one off the top and check one. I'll open it up to make sure it's cooked. If the one that you check or the 2 that you check from the top are cooked, then the rest will be cooked. So with the 3 pounds of meat, I've made a couple of containers. And these tamales, once they're cooled, they can be refrigerated and covered with foil, or you can put them in Ziploc bags. You can freeze them. So some people prefer to freeze some before they're cooked so they can cook some more in the future. I like to cook mine in small batches, and then I'll freeze just a few so that way if the tamales are not eaten, they should be frozen within about 3 days time. The thing is that they're great to heat up and have with coffee. You can have those for at least a couple of months to come. And so that's what I do. I have mine in the microwave and then have mine with coffee and add some salsita. That's up to you. And I hope this turns out well for you. All right, so we've getting some tamales out of here. So definitely using the tongs to get the tamales out. And these did cook for an hour and 15 or hour and 20 minutes. So if they were done. We tested a couple and they weren't quite cooked. All right, so Merry Christmas.